Today, we meet with a Korean-American writer who is drawing attention from readers around the world by reimagining Seolhwa through a contemporary lens. Seolhwa, or Korean traditional folklore, are stories passed down through generations that reflect Korea's history, beliefs, cultural values, and imagination. Angela Mi Young Hur's novel Folklorn, recently published in Korean as Woori Maeari Cheoreom, gives new voices to women from Korean myths and legends while exploring themes of reconciliation, forgiveness, and identity. We are delighted to connect with novelist Angela Mi Young Hur, whose work brings Korean culture and identity to life through literature. Welcome to the program, Angela.
Hello, Angela.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me here.
We're very happy to have you on the show. So, Angela, why don't we start with an introduction of yourself first to our global viewers?
Sure, yes. My name is Angela Mi Young Hur. I'm a Korean-American writer, editor, and teacher. I was born in Los Angeles, grew up in California, attended Phillips Academy Andover, then Harvard, then Notre Dame, where I received my MFA. I am a daughter of Korean immigrants, and I am now an immigrant mother, myself in Sweden. I have a son and daughter who are Swedish, Korean, and American. My novels, Folklorn and The Loom Tree, explore generational cycles, the diaspora experience, migration, and identity, and how we pass on our stories to our children and how we interpret the stories we inherit from our parents, our ancestors, and the cultures we grow up in.
Right, and your novel Folklorn was recently published in Korean, the Korean title being Woori Maeari Cheoreom, which would translate into We Like Echoes. So could you introduce the book to our viewers in your own words?
Yes, first of all, I want to thank my publisher, Open Books, 열린 책들, and especially the amazing translator, Im Sure, for their wonderful work and support of my book in Korea. For viewers, allow me first to explain the themes. So it's about inheritance, what we inherit from our family, including history, cultural background, and generational trauma, and what we can also inherit genetically, which can include mental illness. It's about how we might resist what we inherit and how we interpret and revise that inheritance into what we need to survive, grow, and find peace. Now, in terms of the story, this is how the novel begins. A Korean-American physicist named Dr. Elsa Park is working in Antarctica. She's a researcher studying neutrinos, which are also nicknamed the ghost particle. By the way, her research is based on what my real-life Swedish physicist husband worked on for his PhD, also studying neutrinos using detectors in Antarctica. Anyway, back to the story. So Elsa Park has always focused on career success and achievement to define her, especially in the scientific world, because when she was young, her mother told her that the women in their family were cursed to repeat the life stories of their ancestors. And these ancestors were the women in Korean folktales who were sacrificed or tossed away, like Simcheong, Princess Body, and the girl melted into Emily Bell. And this Emily Bell, as Elsa remembers her mother telling her, is what opens the novel. So when Elsa's mother told her about this family curse, she thought it was evidence of mental illness, which she fears is also hereditary. She also fears the strict Korean gender expectations encoded in these stories. And so that's why she's run away from her mother, her past, and she's pursued science instead, pursuing success in the scientific world, ending up in Antarctica. But while drilling into the Antarctic ice to install detectors, Elsa hears the deep tolling of a bell down below. Moments later, she sees a woman in the distance surrounded by snow, and this woman is wearing only a ragged old sokchima. It's too small for her body, the sokchima, leaving her limbs bare. Her long black hair is braided down her back, and the ends are tied with a red ribbon, a tengi, that unfurls longer and longer across the ice. Elsa recognizes her as her imaginary friend from childhood, but she's no longer the child that Elsa imagined her as. She's now a grown woman. Elsa had banished her imaginary friend years ago when her mother was becoming more insistent about the family curse. But now at the bottom of the world, this friend has come back for Elsa, coming closer and closer while the bell's cry echoes all around. And that's how the novel opens.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I felt like I was listening to an audiobook right now, and so many interesting elements in this book, I have to say.
Yeah, I agree with you there as well. But Talking more obviously of Folklorn, now female figures from Korean folklore are portrayed as reclaiming their identities and finding their own voices. What inspired you to retell their stories in this way?
So I loved reading Korean folk tales and fairy tales and myths from around the world, but I noticed some patterns that troubled me and confused me. Later on, I learned that folk tales and myths have always been retold too. Of course, there's endless interpretations, but the ones that I read as a child in the 1980s, they came from a specific time and culture, and maybe they were marketed for immigrant parents to share with their children. And so what I noticed is a lot of these women were silenced and admired for enduring their suffering, or I never heard about how they felt as they experienced all these dramatic upheavals and turmoil and suffering. So what I wanted to do was interpret it for myself as a Korean American woman, especially someone who studied literature from different time periods and cultures. So I wanted to find what they were thinking and feeling. I wanted these women and girls to speak about their fears and their anger and their loneliness. So as a mother and a teacher, I teach my kids it's important that we don't just passively receive stories and culture, that we actively think about it and question and find interpretation for ourselves to connect. And that goes with how we understand ourselves and our family too.
Right, and you grew up listening to Seolhwa or Korean folk tales such as the legend of the Emile Chung or Emile Bell and Simcheong. So what did those stories mean to you as a child?
So the Emily Bell story particularly, I knew it disturbed me because I heard it as a bedtime story. And I was really puzzled over how different a lot of the Korean stories were compared to the Western fairy tales I was reading at the time. Because the Korean stories emphasized filial duty above all, where it was about the parent-child relationship, where a lot of the European fairy tales, the happy ending was resulted in a prince and a princess being married. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, I always wondered, you know, I thought about what was expected of me as a Korean girl, and I felt that I had to find my own interpretation. So I rewrote the stories in the voices of the girls and women. So I didn't want them, like the girl in Emily Bell, she only cries out when struck. And I knew that Simcheong had gone through so much. She met her a mother whom she believed was dead in the underwater kingdom. But why was it that it wasn't until she met her father and reunited with him that that was the ending? And so I wanted to emphasize that Simcheong traveled in order to reconnect with her father, to have him hear everything she's been through, and for him to apologize, for her to forgive him. And in that, she finds her power and her healing.
Right. And is there a particular Korean folktale that you would like to introduce to, let's say, international readers who may not be familiar with Korean culture?
I think Simcheong has the most sort of various storytelling possibilities and that I've seen. And I think there's so many details that with these little changes transform the entire story. So I really recommend that story, especially if people would read multiple variations and go into the history to see how it's changed. So they can see like, how is the story tweaked and changed in order to instruct and inculcate certain values in people? How is it shaped to focus on different characters? And so I think Simcheong would be an excellent intro to Korean folklore.
Right, and it's also a very popular one. That's why we have it not only in written literature, but also in like musicals and plays as well. But Angela, when writing literature based on Seolhwa, how did you navigate the emotional and cultural differences between the original stories and maybe your own perspective? And did you face any challenges in choosing the right language to convey elements of these traditional stories?
Right. So these folk tales are very elastic and they're used as metaphors. And so the symbolism is so rich. So it wasn't about being faithful to the original, and that's not possible because there are so many variants in history. So instead, I use these folk tales to reflect the family story in the novel. It's primarily a family story and how the narrator comes to understand herself and her family. And so in the folk tales, the male characters are also reflect and sometimes distort the family characters. There's a father character and a brother character. So it's important for viewers to understand that it's not so much about a straight Korean retelling, but how do you use these folktales in order to explore diaspora and the specific psychological traumas of these family members.
Now, although you were born and raised in the United States, Korean culture and stories are the heart of your work. How does your Korean culture heritage influence your creative process?
I think it's a huge influence, and I was thinking about this when I think because growing up as an immigrant, all the culture I received from Korea is sort of filtered through my parents or the immediate community that surrounded us. So it's very limited by a certain generation and a group of people. And a wider understanding I would have gone through books and movies, but translated to English. And so there's a constant process of trying to understand what does it mean? What is the ideal Korean woman? What does Korean culture represent? There's an active process of cultural translation. And so I think in that process, it is a very creative thing because you're trying to understand it. And right now, cultural translation is still a big part of my life because living in Sweden as a parent, I try to impart what I find beautiful and important from my American upbringing. And then also teach my kids to draw from all the cultural experiences we have living in Sweden. I want them to have a connection to the Korean heritage. And so all of that requires an active processing and a cultural translation as we build our identities and understand that they are ever evolving. And so I think because of that, being an act of creation, it definitely powers and feeds my writing.
Right. And before we let you go, Angela, Korean culture is enjoying tremendous global popularity through K-pop and K-dramas. I don't know how it is in Sweden right now, but do you think literature can also become an important part of Hallyu?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it already is. Here in Sweden, too, and of course in the US, literature, Korean literature and Korean American literature are so important and dynamic and vibrant. There's so many who are much more successful and important than I am, which is why I am so grateful for the reception my book has had here. And I feel really fortunate that even though I'm retelling Korean folklore for my specific Korean American family story, that Korean readers have found something fresh and different and illuminating in my own folklore retelling. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful for this opportunity.
And Angela, we are grateful for this interview today with you. Thank you very much for sharing your story and, of course, for sharing the traditional Korean stories to the world in this unique, creative way. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too. Thanks. And thank you, Walter. As always, we're going to have you back here soon.
See you soon.